saw this article from SBS describing a group of American cops overreacting to a situation, which lead to the reporter describing the entirety of American cops as that way. You know, if I were that simple-minded, I would probably make an equally stupid extrapolation that all Korean journalists write with feelings, but luckily I'm not Pyonsan. There's not much information on this case, but I'll try to piece it together a little. In Phoenix, the capital of Arizona, it is said that a little girl stole a doll from the store, and someone called the police on them. A video shows at least two cops being very aggro and vulgar toward the family. They have like zero patience. Only one article I found mentions that the father also stole something as well, because it's, I guess, easier to frame the story like the cops are freaking out a little girl. That's unnecessary. We can clearly see the police overreacting without that framing. No one even defended the police. The mayor said it was terrible. The cops in question are being investigated, and they were taken off the streets. But before we look through the SBS article, let's look at the heart of the story. Are cops in America racist? So the ACLU is one of the main sources people use for things like racial discrimination, and they also gather data for these things. In Boston, for example, from 2007 to 2010, the ACLU showed that blacks make up 24% of the population, but 63% of the police civilian encounters. They also say that most encounters led to no arrests, so their conclusion was that it was obviously racist motives that were driving the police. You can find other research papers that will conclude the same thing. However, the glaring flaw in this research is failing to provide what percentage of criminals in the area are of what race. So to stick with the ACLU's claim, let's look at Boston. 2008. So blacks were 24% of the population. That includes men, women, and children, so the relevant percentage of criminals is actually lower than that. Black people committed 57.8 of total crimes. To top it off, a study from the same time showed that in Boston, blacks report the most hostility from black policemen. Also, here's a special trick. Media tends to inflate white crime by not saying this. Hispanic populations are usually included in with the Caucasian. But luckily some places make note of specific Hispanic statistics, which can be subtracted from white statistics. Therefore, the rest of the breakdown for Boston 2008 is this. Hispanics were 19.4% of the population, 21.8% of the crime. Whites were 52.7% of the population, and 18.5% of the crime. Asians were 9.5% of the population, and 1.4% of the crime. You might say, well, maybe that's just Boston, but it's also a similar breakdown in New York City, in Seattle, and in less urban areas in Nebraska or Washington, for example. You would also see that it's even worse in Chicago, but they deleted their gang databases because facts are racist, I guess. Oregon, one of them, made it a crime to call police on black people. Other cities are doing the same, and the New York Times also wants you to feel guilty for it as well. So, how do cops factor into all this? Well, no one's really making the argument that U.S. police aren't far more aggressive or quick to shoot compared to other developed countries. Though, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, out of nearly 1 million non-arrest interactions with police and civilians, only 1.8% result in some kind of force. That's out of 12.2 million arrest interactions, and only 0.003% of those resulted in death. So from this alone, it's not nearly as bad as the media would portray, but, let's explore further. Some articles claim police are more aggressive because, on average, the police racial demographics don't reflect that of the citizens. Well, that wasn't the problem in Boston. Also, research shows that white police officers kill black suspects at less than proportional rates. In fact, they shoot twice as many white people as black people, and cops are shown to be less likely to shoot black people compared to any other race. Well, if the cops aren't racist, then it must mean the system is racist, right? Well, also no. Since accounting for rate of crime between races, repeat offenses, and surprisingly verbal IQ, a research paper found the association between race and being processed through the criminal justice system was reduced to non-significance. A 2018 research paper analyzed police force and race, and it said, when looking at shootings, we are unable to detect any racial differences in either the raw data or when accounting for controls. Furthermore, the National Institute of Justice reported non-white suspects were less likely to be injured than white suspects, where the race of the suspect was available as a variable for analysis. Although we cannot speculate as to the cause of this finding or whether it is merely spurious, it is encouraging that minority suspects were not more likely to be injured than whites. U.S. police behavior can be linked to three things, I think. The first, I would say, is the rates of gangs in the States compared to other countries. And here's the racial breakdown of U.S. gangs. I mean, this alone could have played a role in that Phoenix story from earlier, based on this map of gangs in the city. So, I mean, you could compare the police force to any European country you want. I mean, it doesn't really make up for these kind of differences. The second thing I think is important to note, U.S. cops have poor training. Korea's favorite albino, Oliver, also mentioned this in his video about U.S. police, and he's right. I agree with him about that, but he would also continue using emotional arguments.
그건 호르에 총 있고 표정도 무서워요. 그런 경우가 정말 많아요. 2011년 사이에 많은 사람들이 어이 없이 죽었다고 말씀드렸잖아요. 그런데 경찰은 31명만 처벌받았대요. 처벌 노답이죠.
Yeah, we don't need to look at what happened. We can just assume they're all guilty.
원래 시민들은 경찰한테 보호 느껴야 되잖아요. 근데 오히려 불신뢰, 불안, 그리고 위협 많이 느껴요.
You sound like what a criminal would say.
경찰은 항상 시민의 편이어야 한다고 생각합니다. 그러기 위해서 미국 경찰들 가야 하는 길이 참 먼네요. 작년에는 거의 1,200명이 죽었네요.
Because we don't want to look at crime rates that tell why cops are shooting. And racial breakdowns of crime aren't important apparently because reality is inconvenient. His whole video's got a bunch of these safe claims without really delving into real data, but unlike him, I will not present the world to viewers like they're fucking naive 5-year-olds. So, bye! Comparing police internationally requires its own video, but to briefly show that it's not so black and white, I found that since 2010, only 11 officers died in the UK. 7 to 8 die in France every year, but in 2010 alone, in the US, 56 died and 53,000 were assaulted. The number of US cops double those in both countries, but the deaths still far exceed that. Cops in the US are on edge, and the training is not helping them deal with the excess attacks, as evidenced by the police in the Phoenix video from earlier. The main guy, he's screaming, like he keeps cracking his voice, like he's scared. He's clearly not prepared, and he probably shouldn't even be on the street in the first place. Speaking of stress, a study that looks at how long police should wait before firing their weapon shows that suspects and police have the same reaction time. But for police, it takes them longer to fire because they have to assess the situation. The suspect simply fires before that. And apparently, whether or not the suspect has his gun already up or down on his side, it's the same reaction time. That's pretty bad news for police on the street. A third reason I think is important. Anti-police rhetoric has been a huge problem, particularly since Obama's presidency. He spoke at a funeral of 5 dead officers who were shot by a black guy who believed in the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And he wanted to, quote, kill white officers. These policemen were from Dallas, which is far from any of the high-profile Black Lives Matter cases, but that didn't stop Obama from telling the family and the friends of these dead police on live TV.
None of us is entirely innocent. No institution is entirely immune. And that includes our police departments. We know this.
A retired New York Police Department commissioner had called this an atmosphere of permissiveness and anti-police rhetoric unlike any that I have seen in 45 years of law enforcement. He says the rhetoric from the mayor of New York City, the Attorney General of the United States, and even the president emboldens criminals and sends a message that every encounter a black person has with a police officer is one to be feared. Just a few weeks ago, these shirts went on sale of another BLM activist who killed a policeman, saying, "One down, many more to go." By the way, that happened in St. Louis. So let's have a little stat breakdown just for fun. Blacks are 13% of the population in St. Louis, but 74% of the crime, 92% of the murders, 82% of the rapes, 87% of assaults, 73% of larceny thefts, 77% of auto thefts, and 77% of arson attacks. Nevertheless, the media and major papers spread a pro-Black Lives Matter message for weeks whenever another police shooting happens, but only when police kill black people. Police of all races feel less at ease now. Some police say Obama has blood on his hands since soon after the Dallas shooting, 3 more cops were killed in Baton Rouge. Someone might say, good. They should feel less at ease because they're guilty. That same person painting police with a broad brush would also say cops are racist because of high levels of black arrests. Well, you know what? Data. Your narrative is proven invalid, but you have a louder voice, and social relations are worse, so good job. Okay, let's finish this up with this shit SBS article.
피부의 색깔이 있는 마찬가지인 우리 국민들도 미국에 가면 얼마든지 당할 수 있는 일인 것 같아 8시 뉴스에 기사화하기로 결정했습니다.
Yeah, this is the 3rd sentence in the article, and no, he doesn't talk about anything but this one situation in the article. Well, this is embarrassing. Because we're also aware of those kimchi gangs running rampant across the U.S.
가장 발사할 수 있는 원총이 겨눠진 상태에서 그런 험악한 역사를 어린아이들 앞에서 들으며 체포되는 젊은 엄마의 심정이 어떨지 잘 상상이 되지 않습니다.
No one asked if you can imagine it. I mean, do journalists learn that they have to make the reader sympathize with whoever their journalist wants? Like, of all the stories, you wouldn't need to be blatantly biased. It's this one, and you still can't fucking help yourself.
번역이 따로 필요 없겠지만 주요 워딩은 나은 것 같습니다.
I feel like I'm reading activist blog or something.
저항이 무강한 상태에서 경찰은 이 남성을 경찰차에 붙여 세운 뒤 난리를 걷어찹니다.
So who's a better judge of this situation? A policeman who works in that city every day, or some dude across the world in a safe building every day?
문제는 이런 경찰의 두려움이 백인이 아니라 유색 인종에게 더 집중된다는 점입니다.
Well, someone doesn't do their research. I'm a fucking dog and I know better than you.
그리고 이런 경향이 트럼프 대통령 취임 이후에 더 강해지고 있다는 건 저만의 생각일까요?
Well, it's not just you, actually, because of garbage articles like this, a lot of people are buying into this bullshit. Which, by the way, he provided zero evidence for. I can make a dozen videos tomorrow just debunking lies about Trump alone, despite not even voting for him. Because it's that easy for a normal citizen to do a modern journalist job better.